Resha, we're just a day away from this NATO summit and all eyes are on Lithuania now because where this is going to happen is just 150 kilometers from Russia. Now, it has already been emboldened, the city as well, and several leaders among the 31 member nations are en route to the city.
Now, a host of issues, including the war in Ukraine, which is obviously going to be mentioned, and Sweden's NATO membership will be discussed. Now, the leaders en route include US President Joe Biden as well as Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. While Trudeau on Sunday departed for Latvia, Biden landed in UK as a part of the three-nation tour, which also includes Finland.
In Britain, he will be holding talks with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and King Charles. This will be his first meeting with the King since the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. While with Sunak, the US President will discuss the Ukraine war and environment-related issues.
Now, in the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius, a firm challenge awaits for Biden, as he will have to defend Washington's decision to supply cluster munitions to Ukraine. Now, Shivan, these munitions are banned by more than 100 nations in the world.
That is exactly where there is a lot of concern. Several of United States allies, including Canada, including Germany and the UK, have already expressed opposition to this decision. But Washington insists that the move is important for Ukraine, which is facing a shortage of ammunition and a slower than expected counter-offensive against Russia.
Apart from this, the participating leaders will also try to chalk out differences on Kiev's membership to the bloc. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is also expected to attend and press for the country's NATO membership.
Both Zelensky and Biden have expressed desire for the same as soon as its war with Russia ends. NATO is expected to present a package of support to Ukraine at the summit, which includes an upgraded cooperation body called the NATO-Ukraine Council.
Meanwhile, another country whose membership will be discussed at the summit is Sweden. It has been trying hard to convince Turkey and Hungary to approve its membership bid, but talks have been stuck in an impasse.
Biden on Sunday held talks with his Turkish counterpart, Erdogan. He said that he wishes to see Sweden joining the alliance as soon as possible. Our next report will tell you more about this discussion.
U.S. President Joe Biden told Turkish Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan that he'd like to welcome Sweden into NATO as soon as possible. That's according to the White House, which said the two leaders discussed a range of issues over the phone on Sunday ahead of an upcoming NATO summit in Vilnius, Lithuania. Membership to the alliance requires unanimous approval by all NATO members, and Hungary and Turkey have yet to clear the way for Sweden. Turkey accuses Sweden of harboring members of militant groups, mainly supporters of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, who Erdogan says organize demonstrations and finance terrorist groups. Swedish officials say their nation is no safe haven for terrorism.
That person can be prosecuted.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg signaled he would convene a meeting between Erdogan and the Swedish Prime Minister in Vilnius on Monday, before the summit officially starts. Biden will hold talks with NATO leaders on Tuesday and Wednesday. During the summit, allies aim to show support for Ukraine and give Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky a sense of what will have to be done to gain NATO membership sometime in the future. In a CNN interview previewing his trip, Biden urged caution for now on Ukraine's drive to join NATO, saying the alliance could get drawn into the war with Russia due to NATO's Mutual Defense Pact. According to Zelensky, an invitation would send a message that the Western Defense Alliance is not afraid of Moscow.
And for more on this, we have with us Michael Tracy, a journalist based out of New York, joining us live on the show. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks.
Now, Michael, U.S. President Joe Biden is not budging from his decision. He says that Ukraine will not be made a NATO member as he feels that Ukraine is not ready for NATO membership. Talk to us about what should one make of this and what are the possible challenges for Washington here?
Well, you have to parse the words that Biden used with a bit of circumspection, because Biden clearly has the ambition for Ukraine to join NATO when he says that the result of this upcoming NATO summit in Lithuania is not going to be an immediate extension of an offer of NATO membership to Ukraine, It doesn't mean that there's not going to be an acceleration of Ukraine's trajectory toward NATO membership in some fashion. We don't have the full details, but I would expect there to be an ascension of some kind where Ukraine takes on a priority status, and in general is integrated more and more intimately into the broader architecture of the U.S. and NATO security framework, which has been already going on anyway. So it's a bit of a red herring or a misnomer to think of it purely in terms of, is the formal membership going to be extended or not? Because there are interim steps to that, which Ukraine has already been well on its way to achieving at the behest of Biden in large part, who has a firm ideological conviction in the necessity of facilitating NATO's accession of Ukraine.
Michael, now, I just want to focus on this dichotomy here. On one hand, Washington is extremely reluctant that Ukraine should become a part of NATO, and the Western allies and certain Western partners are very keen on that. On the other hand, US is spearheading the sending of these cluster bombs to Ukraine, which Western allies and partners are not at all keen on. Talk to us about this dichotomy here, and what should one make of this?
I think it's a misconception that the U.S. is extremely reluctant to bring Ukraine into NATO. It's just that they're proposing a certain pathway for Ukraine to join NATO where they'll be able to continue de facto supporting Ukraine as though it were a NATO member state now, without the attendant obligation that might come with the Article 5 requirement, which is that every NATO member state is at least expected. It's kind of vague and ambiguous as to how this works in practice, but at least nominally there's this expectation that if one NATO member state is attacked by some foreign party, then every other NATO member state declares that they are going to come to the collective defense of the attacked state. Now, with Ukraine not in NATO formally right now, but kind of reaping the dividends of functional NATO status, given all the massive supplies of weaponry it's receiving from the U.S. and the joint operations that have been implemented between Ukraine and the U.S. It's almost like you get the best of both worlds, where you have this sort of back-end NATO membership without having this more sweeping formal status that could entail some kind of larger scale military intervention. Now, on the cluster munitions, actually that goes exactly to this point. That is further enabling Ukraine's fighting prowess and military abilities just to conduct its warfare. And that's, again, a function of Ukraine being brought more and more intimately into the NATO fold here, which is, of course, dictated overwhelmingly by the prerogatives of the U.S.
Right, Michael, you speak of the weaponry that Ukraine has been receiving all this while. Talk to us about how Abraham tanks, cruise missiles, Patriot missile defense systems, and now cluster bombs, cluster munitions. Is the West giving all the NATO essentials to Ukraine without officially letting Ukraine become a NATO member state?
Well, yes. I mean, that's just self-evidently true, because Ukraine has not been a NATO member state when it's been receiving all these provisions of weaponry. Now, every time that a certain weapons system has been floated as something that a member of Congress in the U.S. or pundits or think tank people, that something that they're demanding that the Biden administration sent to Ukraine, often there's this initial period where they kind of feign, meaning the Biden administration does, they feign reluctance, or they feign sort of reticence about going forward with a decision because they're wary of maybe certain escalatory risks. But inevitably, in virtually every single case that you could name, whether it's Abrams tanks, whether it's the Patriot missiles, whether it's the HIMARS rockets, whether it's the F-16s, and now the cluster munitions, invariably the resistance crumbles and the Biden administration sends the weapons. So this whole performance that is put forward of the Biden administration is sort of anguished over the decision, and it's so difficult. Joe Biden himself said that the decision to send a cluster of ministers was so very difficult for him. Well, they said that every single time to kind of lessen the impact of them climbing ever higher on the escalatory ladder by sending these more and more heavy-grade weapon systems.
Thanks for joining in on the broadcast, Michael. That was Michael Tracy, journalist based from New York.
Thank you.